What are some of the common reasons that you see an agency and a brand partnership break down?
Communication, like 99.9% of the time. And you could break that up into, a million other like micro things or interactions. There's just so many communication breakdowns with agencies, misaligned expectations because they didn't communicate enough. And truthfully, the fix, like 99% of the time as well, when people tell me things are going on, my first question is, did you pick up the phone and call? Most of the time it's no, we didn't. I'm like, you should totally try to pick up the phone and see if that helps. And most of the time they're like, yeah, we talked for 2 minutes. Everything's cool.
Daniel, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you, let's just jump to it. You are a matchmaker of sorts for marketers and CMOs. Tell us how you got to this position, because it's pretty unique. There aren't a lot of people that do what you do. So how'd you get here?
I have no clue. No, I sometimes feel like I woke up and 3 years passed. I come from an agency background. I was VP of sales for a small boutique agency in Atlanta for 7 years, up until COVID. COVID hit. Business was, for the most part, decimated, as most were. And I resigned in May of 2020 and was interviewing and I would say passively dipping my toes into what I do now. People were still reaching out for stuff and I was referring business out. And September 8th, I don't know why in 2020, I had like an epiphany of, if not now, when. Working for myself seemed less risky at the time than like working for a company in the middle of COVID. September 8th, I formalized it and launched under the name YouShouldTalkTo. And 3.5 years later, we're here.
What's energizing about it?
I love the people side, truthfully. Like, I joke that I was unintentionally building this business for like a decade and didn't really realize it. Even when I was at my old agency, I always liked marketing and advertising and was interested in it, but I found myself burnt out of the actual work and like resentful towards the actual work. It just like didn't interest me. And clients have the ability sometimes to, disillusion you in the world of marketing, I would say. But I always loved the people that I was helping at, like great clients. I just stopped caring as much about the work as I did at the very beginning when I started. So now my entire business is relationship driven. I like to think I have a good knack for picking partners who are also good at the actual work. But I love the relationship side of it more than anything.
Love that. Well, one of your famous quotes is, finding an agency is easy, but finding the right agency is hard. And so what is agency and client nirvana? It's a concept we've been inspired by you to hear you talk about, and I think will be valuable for our listeners to hear. But also, I'd love to hear a few ways that you identify to elevate the client and agency dynamic as a brand marketer.
Yeah, I'm glad I have famous quotes. This is very flattering already on this interview. I think the first part, what was the first part? Finding an agency is easy. Finding the right agency is hard. I mean, depending on like how you define an agency, there's like 100,000 agencies in the US alone, right? Generally, I find brands are going to talk to 3 to 5 under normal circumstances. And it's like insane to think like, oh my God, we have to find 3 or 5 of the right ones, right? So like finding, there's no shortage of agencies in the messages or inbox or DMs of every brand side marketer all day, every day. Finding like the right fit is extremely difficult. And I feel for CMOs out there and VPs who have, a million other things to do, and identifying agencies is hard. It's hard for me, and I do it, all day as well. Client agency nirvana is something I wrote about a very long time ago. It's like one of those things that I think is hard to define, but you know it when you've reached it, and you even more so know when you do not have client agency nirvana. When the brand cares about the success of the agency, not just their account, and they want to see them grow, and they're happy to give, testimonials or be a referral. And from the brand, when they're willing to, again, like within reason, do whatever it takes. I always joke when, CMOs are like, how do we evaluate? And they get to the end of a process, often when they like all the agencies, is if it's 7 o'clock on a Friday or 10 a.m. on a Saturday. While I don't encourage to send out an email or something like that, and I firmly believe there are very, very, very few marketing emergencies. But if there is, who do you trust to pick up the phone? And while they're not going to necessarily fix it in the moment, who do you trust to say, received and on it, stuff like that. So, the best client agency relationships, in my opinion, which is sometimes a hot take, is it's significantly less about the work and more about all the stuff on the front end. Because if you don't align on so many different things, it's so hard to do good work.
So you help shepherd along that process, and you're consulting on the client side, trying to bring in agencies that could be a fit, trying to help that conversation. What are some of the watch-outs, pitfalls, or blind spots that you often note as part of that process?
I joke too, which goes against my own, business and professional and financial interest. I'm like, you shouldn't trust anybody. Don't trust me. Don't trust the referrals of anybody who tells you until you talk to them, right? Like, just because I say someone's great or somebody else says someone's great or bad on the flip side, like, you need to talk and do that as well. But I think it all starts with clearly defining what you are looking for in the simplest terms possible. Like, I think you all wanted to talk about RFPs at some point in this, like, my goal is to take complex things and put it into like a paragraph that both sides are fully aligned on. And that's the starting off point for it. So it starts there, and garbage in, garbage out. So something poorly defined is hard to get like really great results. But yeah, I think it's being like super prescriptive as a brand and super forthcoming on your budget, on your expectations for everything, communication, the work, all of those things. And the brands that prioritize their agency searches are the brands who get the best results before and after hiring agencies, in my opinion. So prioritization to me is like the biggest key to success in finding an agency, whether you have a tiny budget or an astronomical budget.
We do want to talk about RFPs, and maybe I'll jump ahead and bring that question up because you touched on it. I mean, from my observation on the agency side, the RFP process is so incredibly broken. It's so much cut and paste from old versions. Somebody's trying to put together or ask the questions they think they should be asking. When does this need to be in market or live? Who are the advocates, the champions on the client side? Some of those things never bubble up because of all the ridiculousness in the RFP process. So how do you help that? What's the fix for that?
Yeah, I mean, I generally advise against like very formal RFPs. I think they kind of suck the life out of the process and like getting to know people. There's varying levels of RFPs, in my experience, right? There's like the super, super formal where there's maybe like a platform that, you're working with procurement and you don't even get to talk to marketers at various stages of the process and things like that. I think RFPs, if you think of them more as a jumping off point, are totally fine. Generally, what I recommend, which I used to think was just normal, but apparently a lot of brands seem to like it and haven't done it in the past, is if you're doing anything, but especially like a formal-ish RFP, you do a first round of chemistry checks, right? Of like confirming you even like each other. Right. And that could be 30 minutes of a little bit about us, a little bit about you, and then talking about, how you're going to attack the problem together to confirm that you're even remotely interested in them participating in whatever the next step is. And I joke with agencies because the common, plight of the agency, though, we wasted so much time. If they hate you, you wasted 25 to 30 minutes of your life and you're on to the next, that's the cost of doing business. So I think chemistry checks are really, really important. And that's more for rapport, right? Like doing good work should be the price of admission, right? If you're an agency that's been around for any sort of significant amount of time, like I somewhat assume for the most part, you don't entirely suck at what you do. You've had some sort of staying power, right? But like rapport building, especially for big RFPs, is so crucial, especially for things that are like normal people can't do, right? Like I understand media, but you don't want me in the back end of Google pushing the buttons, right? For things like that. Or spending half a day together is so important. And I do firmly believe that you can figure that out in a 30 to 45 minute call if you're remotely interested in that, right? Could change down the road, within a few minutes if you're, we just don't mesh. There's no energy, no vibe. They don't seem excited about it, that sort of stuff.
Yep. We've been through that process with you and it's led by some of the tenants that you deploy. And this is one of them, which is like, hey, just start with chemistry. Like, is this even worth pursuing on either side, right? And it seems so obvious, but yet brands don't do it. And it's kind of ridiculous because if there's no chemistry there, why are we bothering? Why fill out all this stuff, right?
You could hate the brand too. Like, I think agencies forget too. It's as much there's 20 million different things where you could say, yeah, I don't think we're the right fit, or we don't even get a feel you want to work with us, even though you're saying it, that sort of stuff. So it works for both sides.
What are some of the common reasons that you see an agency and a brand partnership break down?
Communication, like 99.9% of the time. And you could break that up into, a million other like micro things or interactions. But it's so, on the podcast that I host where I interview CMOs, I think I'm on episode 38. I asked that question, what makes a negative agency experience and all this stuff. And nobody ever mentions the work. Like, it sometimes comes from it, but it's first a communication breakdown. Communication sucked, which led to bad work. It's never like, oh, the work just sucked, right? Work you can change, right? If you present creative, it is expected, in my opinion, and it's rare, I should say, where the first thing you do, they go, yeah, that's the best thing we have ever seen, right? And usually, while I joke that like sometimes I don't know if I am the best person to evaluate creative, right? It's so subjective. I say, like, when you're thinking of creative stuff, it's picking people who you think can get there, right? Like, you like their thinking enough where when they present something that doesn't resonate, they take your feedback well and get there on the second try and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, there's just so many communication breakdowns with agencies, misaligned expectations because they didn't communicate enough. And truthfully, the fix, like 99% of the time as well, when people tell me things are going on, my first question is, did you pick up the phone and call? And like most of the time it's no. We didn't. Yeah. Like, you should totally try to pick up the phone and see if that helps. And most of the time they're like, yeah, we talked for 2 minutes. Everything's cool. I'm like, yeah.
What's a phone? We're like, wait.
Nobody likes picking up the phone. So much gets lost in email. It sucks. I hate it. Some of my partners, we haven't worked together an incredibly long amount of time. Some of my partners think I'm weird. They're like, you call a lot. I'm like, yeah. It's easier to talk, in my opinion.
So weird, Daniel. So weird. So knowing that, like, okay, getting to before the problems come, when you're vetting agencies and you're trying to be this matchmaker, like, how could agencies better show up for these meetings or present themselves in order to let the client know what they're all about? I feel like there's some common pitfalls of, like, droning on about a case study, or you've probably seen all of it. So tell us what agencies can do better to create that bond and reveal themselves earlier in the process, I guess.
Yeah, especially if it's a chemistry check, right? The first time, like, everybody knows the dance. Like, if I'm at an agency, like, they know, or I know they know, I want their money, right? And like, the brand knows you want their money and to win and stuff like that. It's be like very prepared and know your audience, but also just like relax, like I think agencies in general over index for, to your point, like case studies and logos and brands, right? When there is time for that, and that can be woven into the conversation. But to me, like, the best way to show up is something along the lines of, we did our research. We would love to hear more straight from you all. And we'd love to tell you a little bit about ourselves. You see where it goes from there. It's everything. It's like competing sides of two different things. You want to be prepared, but not like crazy prepared, right? Like, you need to ebb and flow through a conversation. You want to seem really excited, but not too thirsty, where the brand
sounds
is like
real dating in real life. We could act like we're not even talking about advertising. We're just talking about dating and be like, yeah, this is the same thing.
It's also hard.
Don't be too eager.
Truthfully, it's hard. You have to do so many things on both sides of the spectrum, because again, one of the common things I hear from brands when they don't select agencies is they didn't seem excited, or when they do pick, they're like, yeah, they seemed more excited about the work to work with it. But again, you don't want to seem too eager, because then it's weird, right?
Experts don't show up super like golden retrievers and excited, right? There has to be a level of calm and professionalism at the same time. Like, hey, we know what we're doing, and we're not just eager beavers wanting to be around your brand because it's fun and sexy. It's because we actually have expertise and we know how to help you. So there's a balance there.
It's also too, like, at the end of the day, like, knowing your audience, right? If you have to, again, just by asking questions, there are, I'm sure, a handful of people out there who want to be walked through a deck. In my world, like, nobody really wants to be walked through a deck on a first call, right? Like, they want to just have a open-ended conversation. But if a CMO's expectations is to be walked through a deck and you didn't have one, that's a miss on your end, in my opinion. You should have asked, hey, for this first call, like, in the context of what I do, I'm usually preparing both sides. But out of the context of me, before a call, it should be, hey, our expectation is we're just going to talk. We're going to tell you a little bit about us. We're going to hear a little bit about you. If the CMO says, no, I want a 20-slide deck, walking me through all these things. That's your decision if you want to do that or not, but you should know what they are looking for, on those calls. And the easiest way is to ask. People just don't like asking questions because I think they think it makes them look amateur, potentially, like they haven't done it before.
You seem to really lean into the chemistry of all this, like hearing you talk and just, we've had conversations before, but like if you're going to elevate anything, it's chemistry. And that's, you said loud and clear. But what happens when a client looking for an agency wants spec thinking? They want them to go off and work in a vacuum and come up with a dog and pony show. What are your thoughts on that? Is that productive? Does it work? It's a hot topic.
Yeah, I'd say the short answer with most stuff is it depends. It depends on a lot of stuff, particularly I'd say like the phase at which it is asked, right? In general, I think it is fair during a pitch process. Again, if you're forthcoming with how many agencies are involved, right? For something big, I'm generally making 5 introductions and I say shortlist to 3 after the chemistry round, right? Let's say they do that and there's 3 agencies. I don't think it's out of bounds or unfair to say, come to the pitch with 1 to 2 thought starters for us to talk through together and workshop to a certain degree. I don't think that needs to be paid for, right? But you get to see how they think a little bit. It's not a fleshed out thing, right? When you start getting into like, we want to see, a spec campaign or we want to see a tagline, right? It depends. Agencies have to make calculated decisions on whether it makes sense. And again, I do this so much, so I'm cynical sometimes where it feels normal. And I'm like, yeah, in that context, this makes sense, right? And then there are other times where I hear things and I'm like, like that makes no sense and somebody should pay somebody for that or somebody should push back. But again, like it's really hard. Agencies want more business and they don't want to seem like they're being difficult. But yeah, a lot of it is a sixth sense of when stuff is. And there's always a way to reframe, right? Like if somebody asks for something, I remind agencies, you do not have to say yes to everything, but you should rarely just say no. There's ways to divert. And if there's something you don't want to say yes to, instead of saying no, it's how about this? Like there's usually a third option that is hypothetically or presumably inbounds in the opinion of the agency and arrives at the same thing that the brand wants. But yeah, I mean, when you're putting in a ton of work, like I don't love that if you're not being paid. And, there's a whole other debate of that is sometimes if you are being paid, brands own the idea. Like situationally, it depends. I feel for the agencies. They have to make calculated decisions around risk and who they want to work with. And if it's worth, if the juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Nope. That's a good way to put it. Yep.
Yeah. It is. Well, thank you so much for being with us. And we would love to direct our audience to you. It's YouShouldTalkTo.com. And we'll include your LinkedIn, which is the best way to reach you here in the description below the episode. But thank you again. And we love working with you and look forward to referring people in your direction. So thanks again.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Daniel.